2023 was the year of brand biopics. Let's define that. Most movies are brand-oriented, and a lot of them fall under the larger banner of what I would describe as brand films. Films like Super Mario Bros., the latest Marvel film. Take Barbie, a film that is based on pre-existing IP. While these stories can serve a larger purpose and be considered art in their own way, they also have a product to sell and benefit by having a full-length commercial that people are paying themselves to go see. Brand biopics are unique from Hollywood biopics. They take a specific moment within this company's history and attempt to tell an accurate story of how this company came to be. This will often be in the form of an origin story, examining a very specific person or group of people and tell the overall history of this company in a macro version. The other way of doing this, the micro version if you will, rather than focusing on the creation of this company, they focus on a very significant moment within the company's history and show why that is significant and turn it into the company that we know it to be today. Examples this year of the brand biopic include Air, Tetris, Flamin Hot, the Beanie Bubble, Pinball, The Man Who Saved the Game, and Blackberry. This also extends into TV with shows like WeWork and Super Pumped, but those shows kind of merge into this different subcategory of corrupt business leaders, which can sometimes overlap with the films we're talking about, but they do have their differences. And historically speaking, there have been many more of these biopics that we've even seen grow in the past decade. Films like The Founder and The Social Network. However, this year, we seem to have peaked in our interest and fascination around these brand biopics. A fascinating part about them is that yes, a lot of them do have a product to sell, but that is not necessarily a requirement to make a story like this. Flamin Hot, Tetris, McDonald's, Nike, these are all profitable brands today that have a lot to gain by having these movies made about them. But then you have Beanie Babies and Blackberry, which are practically non-existent today and don't gain anything from these movies being made popular. But a real key to defining what makes this a brand biopic is the idea that rather it being about a specific person, the brand itself becomes the star. That doesn't mean there isn't a central protagonist that these stories follow, but the selling point is never them, it's always the product that they have created. The best example of people taking a back seat to their product is the title of the film itself. If I were to recommend to you films titled Lazarettus or Richard Montanez, you would probably need some more details before you would decide if you wanted to watch those films or not. But if we change those films to Blackberry and Flamin Hot, you have a much better idea of what that film's going to entail. Most biopics in general keep their titles real simple. Films like Elvis, Lincoln, I, Tonya, or they'll use a common phrase that is well known to connect you to that person. Bohemian Rhapsody, Rocket Man, Walk the Line. Simple titles like Blackberry and Flamin Hot are effective within their approach to sell a concept without you needing to hear anything more about it.
I know how to market it, and I know who we can sell it to.
So while these films can draw you in with the familiar title, it's often the nostalgia that comes with the brand that keeps everyone in the audience engaged. The brands used for these stories often represent a specific time period, anywhere from the 80s to 2000s, sometimes even a little before then. And even if you weren't alive during the peak of some of these stories, you probably at very least have general cultural knowledge of what it was like back then. Let's be honest, our culture is currently obsessed with this time period. So because of that, these films are able to pull from our cultural lexicon, shoving in references, montages, anything it can to make you feel good and nostalgic about that time.
Sorry, have you seen Star Wars?
As far as typical tropes go, the one that is always make or break to these films for me are the personal obstacles unrelated to the product itself that these characters need to overcome to be successful. The Beanie Bubble really tries to emphasize Ty's relationship with family, and more specifically women, and in my opinion, this arc doesn't fully work. In order to make it work, I think there needs to be something more there, especially related and more connected to the brand itself, which, like I said, is the real star of this film. I thought Pinball did a much better job of this, using the idea of playing pinball and comparing that to life, saying that it is all about the individual choices we make that affect our outcome. The end of The Social Network has always been one of my favorite endings, as we just see this shot of a sad Mark Zuckerberg sending a friend request to his ex. It's a great use of the product, and the juxtaposition of showing what was made to bring people together ultimately pulled him away relationally. It also helps that Pinball and The Social Network focus on a singular moment within the brand's history rather than the beginning and the end, or how I describe the rise and fall and potential rise again. Air and Tetris also take this singular moment approach, while films like Flamin Hot, Blackberry, and Beanie Bubble take the larger storytelling method. And I wouldn't say that one way of doing it is better than the other. I would argue that there are winners and losers with both of these approaches. So what happens when you aren't able to cram your entire company's history into a 90-minute to 2-hour film? You end it with title cards, slap those alongside images of the real-life people your actors are portraying, and you have captivated an audience. These title cards cards that come at the end of every one of these films serve multiple purposes. They can be used as a shortcut so that whenever you decide to end your film, you can just yada 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 your way to a conclusion. This may sound like a negative or lazy way of storytelling, but often it's necessary because many stories about these brands are still being told today. Take The Social Network, for example. In hindsight, it's kind of crazy that we had a movie about Facebook back in 2010, considering all that's happened with the company since then. But when you throw up the title cards at the end of the film, a subtle implication there is that this is a story that is still continuing to develop. Title cards also help connect the dots and fill in the gap from where we left off in these historical events to modern day, because when watching these films, the audience is likely to know where the brand stands today. So if the film ends in a spot where we know the company isn't, the title cards will help you get there. But this does bring up an inherent problem that all of these stories have, and that is that they're trying to sell you information that you already know. Most of the time when you go into these movies, you are well aware of the ending. You know that Beanie Babies died out, you're well aware that Blackberry went under, and you know that Michael Jordan did in fact end up signing with Nike. Obviously, movies can still be effective when they're spoiled, but that requires so much more from the script to make it interesting, since it automatically loses the element of surprise. Some of these films like Tetris and Pinball have their advantages, because while you are aware of the brand, I would argue not a lot of people knew about the history that these films decided to tell. But Air, Flamin Hot, The Founder, the ending of all these stories are success, and while you might not be aware of how they got there specifically, I would not say the element of surprise is one of their strengths. And with that, the observation that I am most fascinated by with all these films is their worldview and how they choose to define success. These are all films that try to sell capitalism and the success of the American dream. And I know these aren't solely American brands, but what I mean by the American dream is that they celebrate money. These are stories about average, everyday people who defy the odds and find great financial success. And honestly, maybe that's why this genre is so appealing to the average moviegoer. When the movie ends, what makes it a happy movie or a sad movie is often determined by whether or not they ended on top or not. Air is a happy movie that celebrates the billions of dollars earned by Michael Jordan and the company of Nike. Does Tetris illustrate an absent father who misses some of the biggest milestones in his daughter's life? Absolutely. But when he makes billions of dollars off of his product, suddenly all is forgiven and everything is right in the world. And that's not to say that when these brands fail, that makes the movie more interesting, but similar to my earlier point about the personal life stakes, I think the most successful version of these films are when they're able to teach us something a little bit more deeper other than money equals good. For that reason, my favorite ending of the films mentioned above would be The Social Network. Mark Zuckerberg ends on top by the definition of all the other films listed here. He created a product, a brand that would eventually earn him billions and billions of dollars. But rather than ending this on a positive note, the film focuses more on the negative, that he is relationally bankrupt. It's a much more nuanced take on what defines success, and does make you wonder and want to discuss whether or not this is a good or bad ending. Films reflect culture, and I don't need to explain to you because you're probably well aware that our current culture values financial success, so much to the point that that's how we define whether or not a film itself was successful or not. But what if there is more than just money that a film can contribute to culture? The problem is when we try to set up ways to celebrate and reward films that don't always make the most profit, there are still people who think that money should be the standard of how we compare art.
The unforgivable omission of Spider-Man No Way Home. Forget the fact that the movie made $750 million and is still going.
I think I just want to believe that even if you don't make the most money, or if your brand or product fails at some point, there is still a lesson to be learned, and it doesn't mean you didn't contribute anything to culture. At best, I think these brand biopics can teach us something about failure beyond just finances. At worst, they can often be a poor representation of capitalism, where we highlight an individual's value based on how much money they can make.